are the storm because we're standing together organizing a revolutionary movement. I have a very special guest with me today, Hart Seller, who is the pen name for a longtime career federal employee working in immigration on issues with a nexus to national security. And you can find him on X with the handle 8USC12. Welcome, Hart Seller.
Thanks for having me this afternoon. I really appreciate it.
Yes, I'm so excited to have you with us today. We were supposed to do this the other day and I lost power. So I'm so glad that it's back and we're able to bring you on. And so before we get into the mix, will you bring our Heavenly Father into the mix?
Yes, let us do that.
Okay.
All right. Lord, let us give thanks for the miracle of Election Day. The road ahead will undoubtedly be much harder than the road behind, but with your grace and strength, we can get through it together as individuals and as a nation. We ask for your support, your love, your grace. You honor us with your constant presence, and we lift ourselves up to you. We ask for your heavenly favor on earth as we look forward to in heaven. We ask this in the name of you, your Son, and the Holy Spirit. Amen.
Amen. Thank you so much. I love that. So why don't you tell us about, 8USC12? Why is that your handle and why is that so important to you?
Yeah, so 8USC12 is the codification of the Immigration and Nationality Act. So every section of U.S. law has a number associated with it. Title X, Title Y. So for instance, Title 18 is criminal law. So Title 8 is immigration law. So 8 U.S.C. 12, if you just enter that, like you're searching the web, 8 U.S.C. 12 comes up as the Immigration and Nationality Act to reflect that is the chapter and title dedicated to our immigration laws.
I love that. And so I think it's good because then it brings kind of light to things that people may not be aware of. I think these codes and statutes are something that we should be exercising all the time, especially 18 and 42 as well. But why don't you tell me about your career in the federal government?
Yeah, so I entered federal service right after leaving the Marine Corps. And I guess during the tail end of the George W. Bush administration. So I entered federal service then. I was in federal service, obviously, during the Obama administration, then as well during the Trump administration, and now during the Biden-Harris administration.
And that will be going into the Trump administration again, right?
Yes.
Yes. Are you looking forward to that?
Greatly, much more than I was looking forward to going into the Biden-Harris administration. And it was like, I remember the first full work day after their inauguration, at like every department and agency sent around an email instructing us that we were actually to refer to it as the Biden-Harris administration. And I was just like, delete, not doing it. So everything that I've written in the last 4 years has just said, if I needed to reference it, it's been Biden administration. I have no idea if my supervisors are going in behind me and entering hyphen Harris or not. But I was just like, until she pushed out Joe, and then it became like here on X, it became like the Biden-Harris administration. But other than that, I wasn't going to give into that. It was never the Trump-Pence administration when I was writing stuff.
Right. It's interesting how they do that. Now, what were the changes that you saw besides that, having to be referred to that, like throughout your career? Have you seen kind of a slow, steady push to get to where we are today?
It's kind of ebbed and flowed. I mean, during the administration of George W. Bush, there were a lot more illegal aliens than there were, say, during the Biden administration or during the Trump administration. But there wasn't the same sort of restraint that there was during the various parts of the Obama administration and during the entirety of the Biden-Harris administration. So, until this administration, I've never felt like I couldn't actually do things. I couldn't say things. I couldn't go places. And, so that I'm looking to be proverbially have the handcuffs like released on the 20th of January 2025. So, if you've ever seen the Clint Eastwood movie, Heartbreak Ridge. Sorry, a momentary lapse.
That's okay.
So the premise is that Clint Eastwood is a Marine, which obviously I really relate to, and he's in a reconnaissance unit, something I also relate to. So he's at the tail end of his career, and the movie starts with him being arrested for being in like a drunken brawl, and he does some other stuff involving a police car, and he ends up in jail. And so he gets transferred to a new unit, which was a unit he had served in previously. And he checks in with the commanding officer, and the commanding officer is like, I lead this unit, I want to be number one in the Marine Corps, blah, blah, blah. And he's like, and people like you are going to embarrass me. He's like, you're an anachronism. You should be locked in a box under glass that says do not break unless of case of war. So that's kind of how I feel about myself these last 4 years. Don't break glass unless you want, immigration laws enforced.
Right. So, I mean, as we know, there's, they want to, I mean, this is a very well-funded, I would say organized crime syndicate, but do you feel, with the increase in people, I mean, are you seeing that people are, that they really are seeking asylum? Do you think that this is something that because they're being incentivized to come, that's why they're coming? I mean, what's your kind of take on what's actually happening?
Well, so in immigration, there's two concepts. There's what's called push factors, and there's what's called pull factors. So push factor, as the name implies, is anything that makes you want to leave where you're from. And any pull factor is anything that makes you want to come here to the United States. But most of the people coming are not coming for asylum. Like there is, some asylum abuse going on, but the administration is telling us that these people are all asylum seekers. And I could literally show you the stats where almost no one is. And so the whole thing is that, people, Americans are like, well, the cartels are coaching them to ask for asylum. That I'm sure happens. Mm-hmm. But the whole thing is that most aliens are coming from countries where they're afraid of law enforcement, of authority figures. Yeah, they got coached. They were told by the cartel, oh, just say these magic words and it's fine. But a lot of the times when push comes to shove, they break. And so, if they're encountered by a Border Patrol agent and the Border Patrol agent says, hey, why are you here? It doesn't matter how long they prepped their story of woe and, persecution to ask for asylum. They just go, I came for a job. Right. Well, okay.
Right.
The jig is up at that point. You gave away the game. And so they might have an opportunity later on to sort of change their story. But at the end of the day, the stats say that last fiscal year, which ended on September 30th, the full year data isn't available yet, but data through June was. And less than 7% of all aliens encountered, not just at the southwest border, all aliens encountered. So southwestern border, northern border, coastal borders, and every port of entry, every international airport in the United States. Only 7% of that total figure either requested asylum or said that they were afraid they would be persecuted if we deported them. So 93% of all aliens encountered weren't looking for asylum. They were coming for some other reason. But yet the administration's like, oh, these are asylum seekers. They have a right to request asylum. We have to give them a court hearing. Actually, we don't, because if they're not legitimately asylum seekers, the law says that they must be detained and that we can deport them expeditiously.
Right. So, because I found just encountering some of these migrants or aliens that they are saying that they weren't even asked, but that it was just assumed. And so they just kind of put them all under that umbrella. And I have met very few, like you were talking about, that actually are, worried. I mean, people who are like a gay community in another place where they are being persecuted. It was like one of the only groups of people. And really out of that group, there was really one guy in there that seemed very terrified. And he was asking me to take him away from there and like if I could get him a ride somewhere. But it's sad to see because, you know, I think also the NGOs are like giving them this information, telling them what to do. And, you know, it leaves the door open for a lot of fraud, waste and abuse. And I don't think that there's intentionally no oversight for that. Just like for the hundreds of thousands of children that have gone missing, it's like it's because it's a business that the amount of money that goes through different hands, you know, these people don't want to give up all of those, the dollars that come in for it, especially the NGOs. When you're doing paperwork, like I don't know what your paperwork would entail. Is it something that you're looking at documents that have been like the records that these Border Patrol agents have like been giving, or what is your type of paperwork entail when you're doing your job?
So my job tends to veer more towards like illegality related to actual lawful entries, people that came via plane to a port of entry and then later did something else. But there's overlap between what I do and the Border Patrol, so I'm familiar with their forms and processes to the extent that I'll say I've never been a Border Patrol agent. But the whole thing is that, you know, most of the forms are fairly standardized. So, you know, I could find myself using the same form that a Border Patrol agent would. And that's a lot of how it is, even though I'm not a Border Patrol agent, that I understand what goes on at the border because I've spent time there alongside them, you know, out at night on the Mexican side of the U.S. border fence in Yuma, Arizona, or, you know, in the bushes in the Rio Grande. So it's like I've gotten my hands dirty.
Right. And do you actually deal with these aliens, or is it more just on the paperwork side and kind of from a distance?
I mean, so I have dealt with them, but generally speaking, like I said, I do something different.
Mm-hmm.
But, you know, if you need resources, or in my case, like I have been effectively in a, you know, career advancement phase where I've been, you know, hoping that the Trump administration would get elected and that I would move up, because I certainly have not been advancing under this administration. So, you know, I've had opportunities to meet line agents and sector leadership and have, you know, all sorts of meetings with various stakeholders in order to get a better idea so that I can hopefully, you know, advise the Trump Vance administration on how to crack down on some of these things. So you were talking about, you know, the presumption that some of these people are asylum seekers when they're not. And that's one of the things I've dealt with. So, you know, the Border Patrol uses a form, and the form has a series of standardized questions on it, and a Border Patrol agent would have to ask these aliens these series of questions. And the gist of the form is to get an idea of whether or not they can be deported if they're afraid someone will hurt them. But in a lot of instances under this administration, that form is not being used, even though it's required for processing. And it's like this administration intentionally is like, oh, well, we can't, you know, we can keep the public from finding out there's a problem if we simply don't do documentation. Like if we don't leave any paper trail, then we don't have to worry about people getting wise to it.
Right. And finding that and being able to kind of expose what's happening. Now, would you say that that's been happening since this administration, or was that something even beforehand that you found other administrations were engaging in?
Well, so it only goes back, at least as far as I can tell, to a portion of the Trump administration. So, you know, people might recall that Donald Trump said, "Oh, I'm going to only hire the very best people." And that in and of itself was sort of mockery. But one of the people that he hired was a guy named Kevin McAleenan. And Kevin McAleenan already worked for DHS at the time. But Kevin McAleenan became, you know, acting secretary of DHS. And he was actually with her. He was a Hillary Clinton supporter. So he was not inclined to do Trump any favors. And Trump didn't exercise oversight over what was actually going on. So there's actually video from 2018, 2019 maybe, of Kevin McAleenan in the Senate testifying that he knew that these people coming were not asylum seekers, but he was still releasing them into the interior of the United States and giving them work permits. And that should have been like a red flag. He should have been shown the door right then and there, but he wasn't. And so, like, he would have come up through DHS during the Obama administration. And so when he leaves, he eventually gets, fired, and he gets replaced with Chad Wolf. Well, when the transition of the administrations and Mayorkas becomes DHS secretary, well, Mayorkas had been the director of Citizenship and Immigration Services and had been an immigration attorney and had been a board member of a well-known, well-heeled NGO. So this was not the dude's first rodeo. And basically, Kevin McAleenan laid the groundwork for what we see now as far as intentionally letting people out that had no legal right to enter or remain in the United States under the auspices of being quote unquote asylum seekers.
Yeah, it's crazy to think about that. Now, within your place of work, are you finding that there are people are upset? I mean, do they feel the same way as you do? Are you even able to talk to them about it?
There are people that I think are upset, and there are people that I don't think are necessarily bothered that much. It sort of depends on who the person is. There are people that are, like, well, we should prioritize criminals. And if you're just here, to work, like, you're not that important. And then there are people that are like me that are like, well, the law says that anybody that's here illegally is deportable. We don't have to wait for them to be a criminal. This isn't like a waiting game. Oh, well, we can only deport you once you've hurt an American or, some way impacted an American's life. No, the law is very clear. If you're here and you're illegal, then we can deport you. So, like, there's some of each kind of, like, I'll give you an example. So in 2002, when DHS was created, and then in turn ICE was created, they took essentially the plainclothes portion of what used to be known as the Immigration and Naturalization Service, the INS. And so they split it off from the Border Patrol and from what is now the Ports of Entry operation, which is now known as the Office of Field Operations. And then they spun off the benefits granting into USCIS. So that just left Interior Immigration Enforcement, and they combined that with customs enforcement. And so the customs used to be part of the Treasury, and the legacy INS used to be part of the Department of Justice. So they basically smashed these two not entirely disparate organizations together, but pretty different. And so, like, you have now your special agents for Homeland Security investigations. Its leadership is almost exclusively career customs dudes who have zero interest in touching an alien for any circumstances. They would be happy with sexy cases. Oh, we do gang cases and terrorism, but they don't want to have to actually interact with the gang members or the terrorists. They just want to say we do this. And then you look and you'll see, like, in their X feed, dumb things like, oh, we're providing material support to the Super Bowl, and we're arresting people for, having fake jerseys and fake championship rings. And it's like, meanwhile, the Super Bowl is the single largest, individual trafficking session of women and children every year. But it's like, why don't you worry more about trafficked women and children and sex crimes than, about boxes full of smuggled fake jerseys? Like, come on, where are your priorities?
Why do you think that is?
Just because of the fact that Congress never required the leadership of HSI to actually focus on immigration investigations. When you combine people that spent their entire career focused on customs offenses, and now you give them responsibility for sophisticated immigration-related crimes, but you don't actually oversee them to ensure that they're doing them, then they're just going to blow that off. And it's like, that's that's too much hard work, and that's like things that we don't want to do. So like ERO, the actual enforcement side of ICE, they just changed names. Like they literally were the same dudes doing the same job the day after the Homeland Security Act passed that they were the day before it
Right.
passed. So for them, there was no difference. But for HSI, you had just an entire different mindset that takes over and comes up through leadership. And so now it's like it's a growth that needs to be removed by the Trump Vance administration. They need to be told in very uncertain terms, look, our priority is immigration enforcement. And if you don't want to do immigration enforcement, then you can go to USA Jobs and you can find yourself a special agent gig at any other department or agency and go work there, because this is our priority.
Right. And so do you think that we are going to see a turnaround, having Trump and Vance come into office in January? Do you think that, that he's going to stay true to his word and do what he has promised, like on day one?
Yes, but it will require continued effort by Americans. Trump it looks most likely, even though there's still some outstanding House races, that he's going to retake the White House in January with the House and with the Senate and with a right-leaning, I'm not going to use the term conservative to describe the Supreme Court. I feel like right-leaning is generous enough as it is. So a right-leaning Supreme Court, he's literally going to have a trifecta of government. Right. And he campaigned on mass deportations, but he's not, I'm not confident that he will do them unless there is continued public pressure to do them. Like, if I can say, one thing about Donald Trump, it's that he wants to be liked. But the problem is that, roughly half of the country didn't vote for him. They don't like him, right. And they're never going to like him. So there's no point in engaging in theoretical discussions about like legislation that's a compromise or anything else, because you're never going to change their mind. They don't like you, they're never going to like you. Stop pandering to them, focus on the half of the country that does like you, and the spillover of anybody that didn't vote for you but is like in their heart is like, what's going on at the southwest border is not okay. What's happening to women and children isn't okay. Interior crime's not okay. Because there are Democrats like that. Immigration used to sincerely be a bipartisan issue where both parties believed that immigration over a certain extent, and especially illegal immigration, was harmful to Americans. So it's only this, a fringe portion of the Democratic Party that is like, no borders, no police, get rid of ICE, etc. There are still like people in the middle, like the left of center, that want to see actual immigration enforcement. They just don't want to see the ugly side of it. They don't want to see women and children dragged off in handcuffs. They don't want to see like stories of people going to hide in churches, drawing correlations to the Holocaust. Brown people hiding in churches is just like what happened to the Jews in Europe. It's like, why? Why do you have to engage in dishonest and materially false, like, hyperbole to make your point? If you don't support, enforcement or immigration laws, then fine. But don't bring down the memory of horrible things that have happened to other people just because somebody doesn't want to get deported. Right. Being deported is not actually, contrary to what people think, it is not actually a punishment. The Supreme Court has actually ruled on numerous occasions, deportation is a consequence for actions. It is not a punishment. So, if you come here illegally, the consequence is you get sent back. That's not actually a punishment. You might feel punished. People might feel you were punished, but it's not a punishment. It is a consequence for an action that you took.
Right, willingly. And I think about when you're saying, people don't want to see, women and children be handcuffed and things like that. Well, I don't think they fully understand what's actually happening with these aliens as they're coming across, like the rapes that take place, the fact that these children are being trafficked, and the fact that all of these people are. I think that if they really understood what was happening, I mean, how can the government lose over 325,000 children? And I guarantee you that number is not even correct, but in itself is bad enough. So, I think that they don't even, because, I hear people say it all the time. They're like, that's not happening. They don't want to accept it. And in that, it's going to perpetuate the problem because it's not going to stop if we don't bring light to it.
Yeah, that's exactly right, because you're right. The number is actually that number, the 320 whatever, 21, 25,000. If people were to actually go and read the OIG report, is actually alien children between 2019 and like May or June of 2023, I think. If you look at the Biden-Harris administration, we're closer to 500,000 legit between February 1st, 2021 and 30 September of 2024. So, people have a right to be outraged, but they should actually be outraged about the entire process, but
Right.
also how, it took several years to get to 321,000, and fast forward, we get to like almost twice that many in, a fraction of the time.
Right. Do you think that's intentional? Do you think it's an intentional uh, negligent? I mean, because it's like, is it negligent? It's willful at that point. But I mean, I don't think that they're that stupid. I mean, I think that they have plans that they have in place, and it's not like, oh, whoops. I mean, I feel like this has been the plan all along, because then, what are you going to do about it? Then you have all of these children that you can traffic. And if we are the biggest human traffickers in the world already, just with our own children, and I don't even think people want to recognize that this is something that, they've been planning all along.
Yeah, I mean, you would be surprised how far stupid actually can get in the government. Say this as somebody in the government. Like, my unpopular opinion is a lot of what's going on was intentional, but the end results weren't. So I'll explain that. So
Yeah.
I believed that the Biden-Harris administration came into office intending to sort of open up the flow of illegal immigration. Like, maybe we would have, 100,000 people cross illegally a month for 4 years. Well, that's a lot of people. But the
Right.
problem is that the zealots that they put in charge quickly lost control. And so the end result of what we're seeing is the part where stupid came into play. So you started out with malice, and you let the people, you let stupid people be malicious, and you get what we see going on. So, it used to be historically that children weren't so much trafficked as they were smuggled.
Right.
And I know that Americans often don't, like, they don't understand the differentiation, but all, like, not all smuggling is trafficking, but all trafficking has an element of smuggling in it. So it used to be when children were encountered unaccompanied, they were being smuggled here at the behest of their parents. And that was usually to whom they were released, either directly or indirectly, by a mechanism that's essentially been in place since the Clinton administration. But now we have so many people coming, and so many instances where they're not even like being smuggled for the parent. They're with somebody that's not a family member or a legal guardian, or in any way related to them. They have no idea who that person is. And then they get apprehended the same as an adult, but then they have to be transferred to Health and Human Services. And that's how we get quote unquote lost children, because
Right.
all HHS feels it's required to do is essentially, I'm dating myself here, but if you think back, if you're old enough to recognize a reference to Dunkin' Donuts in the late 70s and to like mid 80s, there was a little old man in Dunkin' Donuts commercials. And his only line was essentially, "It's time to make the donuts." He was always either on his way to work or his way home from work, having made the donuts. That's basically a visual for Health and Human Services. They focus on the donut making of placing children with someone that will sponsor them. And after that, they just wash their hands of it. They say in, congressional testimony, well, we don't have any obligation to track down children after we place them. We will give a courtesy call, and if the sponsor doesn't answer, then we might or might not call back, but we can't make them answer, and we can't make them show us the child or anything else. So it's just like, why are we facilitating a system that we know is broken? And like, any issues that I would have had with what happened to children before this administration are like vastly worse now. We need to just blow up the system.
Yeah.
The current system came about because of the Reagan administration. So the Reagan administration came into office, and it created a policy where if a child was unaccompanied, the only person that could get the child out of immigration detention was a parent or legal guardian. There were no exceptions. So, children were coming unaccompanied or with so one of the children, quote unquote, that led to what people might know as the Flores Settlement Agreement came with her brother, and she was Salvadoreña. Her parents stayed back in El Salvador, and she came here with her brother, who was like 17 or 18. And the brother got released by the Border Patrol, but Border Patrol would not release the sister. So they told the brother, your parents can come down here and get her out of jail. And the brother was like, well, they're in El Salvador. And the government was like, well, sorry. So he found, a pro bono attorney who worked with NGOs to basically sue the Reagan administration over this rule. And then there was ongoing litigation until the Clinton administration. And basically the Clinton administration settled and created this entire now, trafficking facilitation by the U.S. government, where it doesn't matter what somebody does with a child, the child is going to basically get to stay here. And we'll just be like, oh, sorry. That's how, we get things like DACA. Because, people are like, oh, well, they were brought here, through no fault of their own. That's generally true. But there are plenty of DACA recipients who came on their own.
Right.
So it wasn't a matter of they were brought here and they didn't have any defense. It was like, no, they came here either because they had friends or family here, or they wanted to provide for their family back home. And we're just like, oh, well, okay, sorry, So we need to start cracking down on children.
Right.
It's like, I'll give you an example. So people like to focus on the left, like to focus on the kids in cages thing. And so the Obama administration built the cages in Texas. It did not build the cages in Arizona. It inherited them from most likely the Clinton administration, because they were built for young, single Mexican males who at the time were the majority of crossers. It just happened to be, it was a place where you could, quickly warehouse children. Well, what people don't likely know is that still at the time, most of the children were from Mexico or the Northern Triangle, so El Salvador, Guatemala, and Honduras. Those countries' consular officers would come to the facility with cages. In some cases, like one of the countries, I think Guatemala, only came like once a week, like on Wednesdays or something. And the other two came like several times a week and would interview the children, and, but they didn't take them back. But they also didn't complain about how we were abusing the children until the Bad Orange Man. And then all of a sudden you have all three of those countries. You can't be doing this to our children. Well, why don't you take your children back then? And we won't do it. But they don't, and we don't make them. And we have a law that basically says we're obligated to screen children to make sure they haven't been trafficked. Well, we're doing the super job on that, clearly. But the thing is that legislation doesn't say we're obligated to keep those children. It only says that we have to make sure they weren't trafficked. If they weren't trafficked and we can prove it, then we need to be putting them back on planes and returning them to their country of origin. And they can, as cold as this sounds, they can be that country's problem.
Yeah, I mean, it's interesting because I feel like, when they're talking about, like how they deal with this, I mean, because through HHS and foster care and stuff like that, they're more willing to take a child from their parent and saying, that the conditions are unsafe or they're being abused, but they don't mind putting them into abusers' hands and then doing nothing about it. So it's like, on one hand, they act like, well, we care and we got to make sure that these children are safe, but they're intentionally putting them in harm's way. I have a friend whose children were taken from her. They're being put in foster care and were being upset. He was being sexually abused. He was, like 5 or 6, and they put him on psychotropic drugs just because, of all of the trauma that he had endured. And so it's like, instead of removing him from that situation, they put him in it and are forcing him to stay there, all while, medicating him to help him to just surrender to it, to just be okay with it. So it's sad to see that, there's such confusion, I think, with the people, because people want to believe that people are good and that they have good intentions. But when you see this kind of negligence, it is, and for me, I can't help but call it willful, because you know what you're doing. If you're saying that we're not going to go and make sure that these children are in a good condition, accept all of these children, I mean, even infants, and saying that, yeah, they're seeking asylum, and all happening kind of starting in these prior administrations that we know are engaged in child trafficking. I mean, we know the Clintons are. It's something that, not a lot of people want to accept, but it's true. I'm surprised that there aren't more people that would be willing to, kind of whistleblow and want to come forward and expose this for the nefarious agenda that it is. Because but then I think about, sorry, I'm like, my brain is going all these places. I think about just their agenda with the children anyway, and to sexualize them and to do all the things with the transgender affirming care, and making sure that, they will take a child away from a parent if they don't want to capitulate to that. So I feel like it's they say it's this, but on the other hand, in reality, it's completely the opposite of what they claim it is. Do you find that to be true?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, there's I'm familiar with Aaron Stevenson and Tara Lee Rodas, and I'm sorry that they are essentially in a club by themselves. That they
Yeah.
are not. There should be a thousand of them, like, whistleblowing on the horrible things that have been going on, and not just this administration, but I don't care which administration it might have
Right.
happened under. The Obama administration will deny till the very last member of it dies that they didn't separate children, but there are quite literally documents. They're probably the only time you'll ever really legitimately hear me cite an NGO. There was an NGO that actually did surveys with deported Mexicans in across from the facility in Arizona where children were being put in cages, and they would say, I got separated from my child. Well, where's your child now? I don't know. But the Obama administration's like, no, sorry, we temporarily, occasionally, maybe sometimes separated children, when there was a question about parentage. That sounds legit. But at the end of the day, why do you have people saying that they don't know where their kid is then?
Right.
Like, they seem to think it's their kid. Why is it that you don't think so? And things were actually so bad that there's an NGO called Kind, and it's Kids in Need of Defense, KIND.
Mm-hmm.
Kind actually published a paper in January of 2017, I'm sorry,
Oh my
where,
goodness.
yeah,
It's in the
it said
future.
as soon
I'm
as
just
it came
kidding.
out, that was basically talking about how family separations during the Obama administration were pervasive. And in some of the cases, like, there were reunifications, but that is where that clip about family separations comes from. So I'm sorry, but I'm much more inclined to take the word of a parent than I am to take the word of somebody that worked for, the Obama administration.
Right. Well, and with them removing the DNA testing, do you think that was something? I mean, I'm hoped. I mean, shoot, do you think Trump will bring that back?
Oh yeah, absolutely. I mean, it doesn't matter if we need to, like, have agents, like, buying them with government credit cards at CVS. Like, that needs to absolutely happen. 100%. And not just to establish family relationships, but also there is a law on the books that anybody that is in federal custody is supposed to be DNA typed and their DNA sample submitted to the FBI. So all of the people, look at all of these crimes that have been committed just during the Biden-Harris administration alone of aliens that they let into the country. So
Right.
Jocelyn Nagari, Lincoln Riley, a ton of other people that I could name, but those are the first two that came to mind. How much easier would it have been to solve those crimes if local law enforcement could have gone to the FBI and said, we have this DNA sample, can you match it for us? But we're not taking DNA samples from all of these people that we're releasing in the United States either, even though that is statutorily required, whereas DNA testing parents and children presenting as family units is a best practice. I don't think that is expressly codified. So
Right.
it's just like, it's inconvenient to do things like that because you might find out things you don't want to know.
Yeah, but that's exactly why we should be doing it. Do you know what I mean?
Yes.
It's just for precaution. I mean, especially when these people will drop their IDs, get rid of them so that they can't be shipped back to their country. It's like there should be some kind of mechanism in play that will ensure that you have some kind of data on them to make sure that if, like you're saying, if something does happen, we shouldn't wait till something does. That's the weird thing when you were talking before about how well, if they commit a crime, then we can go ahead. And it's like, why would you even want to play that game and go down that path? We should be doing things prior to that happening to make sure that it doesn't, not just go, well, if it does, then we'll deal with it then. And I feel like that's kind of, they kind of do play that game where, they're just assuming everybody has good intentions when we definitely know that it's not, especially after it repeatedly happens. I mean, day after day, there's stories about, someone being murdered, raped, or, just whatever it is. I mean, even in San Diego, we have a little girl that's been raped. She's 5 years old and it was by a 22-year-old alien. And, they're trying to hide that information. So I find they're more trying to protect these people than our own people here. And, you got to ask yourself, why would they do that? Because it's not as though they don't know what's happening. They surely do, but it's as though they're just always saying their hands are tied. I find that a lot of times that's mostly that oh, it's a federal issue. It's this issue. It's that. We can't do anything about it. And I think in that, it allows it to continue because nobody's willing to really do anything about it.
Yeah, I mean, there is an awful lot of truth in that, but the other side of the coin is that, in our super polarized country these days, is that it's easier to sell people that are against immigration enforcement on doing it if you tell them that we're just going after criminals. That's kind of like the evolution of our country when it comes to understanding enforcement of immigration laws. So in the 1990s, both parties were absolutely opposed to illegal immigration. And then going forward, as time progresses, the Republicans, they kind of vacillate on it because they're for a big business and big business is for cheap labor. But the Democrats just suddenly just veer off entirely into uncharted territory. First it's well, we're against immigration enforcement. But you can still deport criminals. And, well, okay, that's not an ideal compromise, but fine, we'll take it. But then they just keep going further and further afield. And then it's well, it doesn't matter if they're criminals. We don't want you to deport them because you're going to break up families and families belong together. It's you're how did we get from you're being here illegally and the law says you're deportable to, okay, fine, we're okay with illegal immigration, you can only deport criminals, to you shouldn't deport anybody, it doesn't matter what they've done, they have a family, they have a life here, it's like a game, it's like citizenship without value.
Right.
Oh, well, we can't deport citizens. It's well, they're citizens they're American in all the ways that matter. No,
Yeah.
the only
Okay.
way that matters is that you have a document by the US government that says that you're a citizen, or, you have something by the state government that says you were born in the United States. Those are the only two ways that matter. So this
Right.
nonsense about, well, they feel American. I could feel like a unicorn, but that doesn't make it true. So why are we giving into that argument? And it's like Democrats don't actually care enough to change the law. I'll tell them, fine, if you don't like the law on the books, change them. I'll enforce the new ones because that's what I've sworn an oath to do. But they don't actually care enough to do that. They just want to complain about it and raise money off it.
Yeah. So in San Diego, we have a Truth Act, and it's regarding not sharing this information. That's what's so sad, because right when they cross the border illegally, they've committed a federal offense. So it's like, why are we protecting these people after they've committed a crime? And my information gets shared. My information isn't hidden as far as that goes when I've been arrested, and, they share it through all law enforcement. But then it's like these people, they want them to be a protected class. They say like they're Americans now, like once they step foot on American soil. That's why I always say, like, so what, I go into Mexico and I'm a Mexican? Like, that's not how it works. But as long as you keep telling people that, they'll accept these types of things. But I guarantee you, if I was the one who like raped this little girl, they would definitely want to make sure that that information was known, that I would be deported. So it's weird that they want to protect these people, but I find that in researching this and dealing with it in San Diego, that there are a lot of people in San Diego that want these people here. So they want to protect them, but they don't want to protect the people that are here. I mean, I don't feel like it's like even across the board that they think that if I was the one that would have raped this little girl, that I should be protected like that. But because it's their family, I mean, they make all these different excuses as to them being American, that we need to repopulate because, there's people aren't having babies as much. But that goes along with their agenda of depopulation and all of the nefarious things they do with abortion and with, and for encouraging trans children and things like that. So, I mean, it's happening anyway, but then they also, like the workers, it's cheap work. They'll do work that nobody wants to do. But I think in that they're like kind of sidestepping away from the fact that these people, many of them are criminals, and we shouldn't be allowing that to like happen in our nation. But that's why I feel like, I think a lot of people are misled and they don't really think about what consequences it is. And it would almost have to happen to somebody they know for it to actually matter.
Yeah, that's true. But then you have now I can't think of the poor young woman's name in Idaho, where she was killed by an illegal alien, and her family was like, "Don't pick on him. It's not right." Or in around Springfield, Ohio, in the suburbs, there was a Haitian quote unquote migrant who lost control of his vehicle and hit a school bus and sent the school bus downhill into a ditch, killing one student and severely injuring several others. And the kid's family is like, don't make this an issue about immigration status. This was a tragic accident. Yeah, it was a tragic accident. But I am going to make it about immigration status, because if he wasn't here, then in all likelihood, that bus would have never been hit and your child wouldn't have died. You see how, cause and effect actually, matters. And there are too many people that give in to, the feel-good scenario where they're willing to, as disgusting as it seems, to sacrifice their own families in furtherance of this, one world agenda where we all sing Kumbaya and borders don't matter anymore.
Right. Yeah, because I mean, do you know about the United Nations Agenda 21, 2030, 2050, all of that? I mean, because this is right in lockstep with that. This has been like, that's why I think it's incremental. Things kind of come in a snail's pace, but also really fast. But it's something that has been in play for a very long time. And these are just steps to get us to the one world order that they actually want. One world religion, like one world government, all of those things, and open borders. We shouldn't have any borders. And then at what point would that be? Are we just world citizens? You know what I mean? Like, would there be no Americans anymore? Would there be no Venezuelans? Like, what would that look like? I wonder. But so do you just find that is in lockstep with this whole plan?
Yeah, it's hard not to see that there are certainly elements of it. I remember when Trump was running against Clinton the first time, having a discussion with a younger cousin who wasn't very politically active. And he was like, man, do you think that Hillary Clinton is going to like try to create like the North American Union where we become essentially one country with
Right.
Mexico and Canada, like Europe? And I was like, I don't, maybe not. But like now I look back on that discussion, I'm like, I was probably wrong. Like that may have actually happened if she had won instead of Trump. And I'm kind of surprised it didn't happen under the Biden administration. But, we have other things instead, like, the Los Angeles Protocol on the freedom of movement or, whatever it's called. There are other subtle steps that get us towards that, which then gets us towards not being, Americans in the way that we know it anymore.
Yeah, I mean, it's interesting to see, and like just knowing that agenda, I see it being implemented just as far as like the climate stuff goes, and wanting to put us into like a 15-minute city, control your movement. I mean, they don't want us driving, they want us walking, biking, or taking public transit. So I've seen it kind of being pushed in with that, and then add this on top of it, it's just a whole other element. And the sad thing is that and I don't know if you encounter this at all in your job, but the people that do want to come legally, it's almost like a de-incentivization to do that through just being able to come and cross. Because I met someone who tried it a couple of times, was denied, and decided to come the illegal way. So I don't know if you've seen like any kind of side of that, where are there more people trying to seek asylum? I mean, to seek citizenship in the legal pathway, or is it that there's been a decrease in those numbers because of the flood coming across the border?
I mean, so a lot of my work involves people that got here legally, but the whole idea is, people go, oh, well, yeah, we shouldn't have illegal immigration. We should deport these people and they can apply to come back legally. That's not how it works. Like you should just stop your sentence at they should be deported, period. Because aliens come illegally, whether they came legally and then overstayed, they refused to go home or failed to do so, or they enter between ports of entry. They come illegally or stay illegally because they can't do it the legal way. So we shouldn't kid ourselves that we can, let these people just make amends and go home and come back legally. They came the way they did because they knew they couldn't come any other way. So like, the visa application fee is pretty much the same amount around the world. It's just, whatever the local currency is. But that is in some cases months and months or years worth of money for somebody. And you have to have a passport in order to apply for a visa to the United States. So why, let's say you have a passport, which a lot of people in other countries don't have because it's super expensive to get. Why are you going to pay non-refundable money that you don't have to try to get a visa that you're probably not going to be granted because the U.S. government is going to view you as somebody to be an future illegal immigrant? The concept in law is called intending immigration, that you intend to become an illegal immigrant. You're not going to get that money back. And if that's whether it's a month or a year's worth of wage for you, you might as well just set that money on fire. So people come illegally, across the southwestern border primarily, but now at the northern border or on, janky boats from Cuba or Haiti or the Dominican Republic because they can't come legally. So Americans should not be trying to make themselves feel better by saying, oh, well, they can just apply to come back. If they can apply to come back, they could have applied to come in the first place, but they didn't.
Right.
Stop and ask yourself critically why they didn't, because they can't. There's no line for them to get in. Now, the difference between like me and a liberal or me and a libertarian is they're like, well, they should be able to. It should be easier to come here. Maybe, but probably not. The laws that make it difficult to come here are about protecting Americans. And
Right.
that's why those laws are on the books. So no, we shouldn't be watering down those laws to feel good about ourselves, to have cheap labor, so that people overseas don't hate us, so that
Right.
Disney World can make more money. Like, none of those reasons matter. The laws are there for a reason, and that reason is for the benefit of Americans.
Yeah, and that's the sad thing is I feel like they think that like we're just punishing other people, but it is to protect our nation too, because I mean the only way to really take it down and like to have their one world order would be to, you know, to go to America and take it out from within. And this is really the only way to do it. But I don't think, because even just talking about this agenda and all of that to people in say San Diego, because we bring it up to, you know, the public officials who are in lockstep with that agenda, with the United Nations agenda, you know, they just want to call us conspiracy theorists. People don't really want to believe that this is happening. And so they want to act like, you know, you're xenophobic for saying that. But in reality, it's like we have to protect, you know, ourselves. Like, and we can't even care for all of these people. That's the sad thing is I don't understand how they think that we can continue to let millions of people in. And so how many people do you think have actually crossed? Because I know there's not different numbers that get thrown around, but like, according to what your job entails, what are those numbers that you see in the millions?
Well, so there's basically there's three groups of numbers. There's apprehensions, which is publicly available data anybody can look up. Then there's gotaways, which are usually explained by journalists, but not usually accurately. So a
Right.
gotaway by statute has to have been seen either directly or indirectly, but then not caught. But then
Right.
there's a third, and so gotaway data also isn't intended for public information. It's usually leaked now and, you know, reported by journalists, but that information is actually only intended for Congress as part of annual border security metrics data. But then
Okay.
there's a third subset, which is they're known as UUEs. So UUE stands for undetected unlawful entry. So that's essentially a gotaway that was never seen. So I know that we're at more than like 7.1 million apprehensions. So that's people who got arrested by the Border Patrol after they entered. But some of that is like recidivism. So, you know, there's currently about like 25% recidivism, which is
Mhm.
crazy because this administration is letting in like large numbers of people. So there's 7.1 million. The gotaways, last I heard, was easily 2 more million. So there's now it's 9.1. UUEs is like the range, because it's entirely estimated,
Right.
can be anywhere between 0 and like 50% of apprehensions. So if the apprehensions under this administration are 7 million, then that means that potentially UUEs are like another 3.5 million. So that's 13 some odd million. And that's only the southwest border. And then, you know, on top of that, we have the northern border where, you know, like one sector alone, I think, said that they had more apprehensions last fiscal year than like 5 or 10 prior years combined. So we have no
Wow.
idea about the northern border because
Right.
those metrics aren't even really kept to the same extent that they are for the southwestern border. And then, of course, the Coast Guard is responsible for trying to interdict aliens at sea, but they're not always entirely successful. And then, of course, we have those are only just the plain vanilla illegal entries, because then we have the Biden Harris administration letting in people who
Yeah.
are technically they can't be admitted. So the term is inadmissible, but it's a letting them enter anyway during, like, for instance, using the various parole programs. So like people know CHNV, but there's another program called FRP. There's another one called U4U. There's another one that is for like Central American children called the CAM program. So there are all of these different programs, but weirdly only CHNV is the one that ever receives any sort of scrutiny, and that
Hmm.
there's like easily published verifiable data published monthly about. So if we combine, like, so out of the 7.1 million apprehensions, I know for fact like 2+ million of those people were ultimately released into the United States. And then, so on top of that, the aliens that are like using this EBP1 app at Southwest Ports of Entry and through
Right.
the various parole programs, I haven't recently crunched the numbers on that, but I'm sure it's probably like at least a quarter of those people that have been let in. So we're easily, approaching 15 million territory. And since the official number of illegal aliens, like as a population, is only like 11 million. It was 11 million, quote unquote, at the beginning of this administration. So, we can safely say it's now easily double that and not be like, xenophobic conspiracy theorists, because,
Right.
people on the right like to cite a joint study by MIT and Yale that was trying to estimate the population, and it had like a bound. And so like the upper end was like 33 million people at the time the government said that it was only 11 million. And
Right.
then you have like organizations like the Center for Immigration Studies. They were at the beginning of this administration also favored the about 11 million estimate. And their argument is sound. It's that not all illegal aliens stay illegal. If you marry a
Right.
US citizen, then you could potentially get a green card. If you have a child here that we regard as a US citizen and that child makes it to 21 before you get deported, they can get you a green card. Aliens
Right.
die, aliens go home. So like there's like a lot of people just tend to see it as just like it just exponentially increases without factoring for the various ways that people are no longer in that population anymore. But I feel like,
Right.
22 million is safe at this point.
Yeah, that's crazy to think. So do you think a lot of them are potentially marrying people here, and so it's giving them a different status at that point? I mean, because I haven't really met people who want to do that, but I would assume that if they knew that that would be a reason for them and that they could stay, that they would be willing to do that.
I don't think it's in large numbers. I like it does happen because, like, you look, was it yesterday? A federal judge struck down the latest parole program, which was for long-term spouses of U.S. citizens. And so, what that did was that allowed them to remain in the U.S. legally and get a work permit. But more importantly, it allowed them to get green cards, because what happened was that particular population of illegal aliens entered the US illegally. They didn't come as, on a visa and then overstay. Those people can automatically get a green card once they marry a US citizen. But if you enter the US illegally without inspection, then you're required to return to your country of origin and get a visa, be interviewed by the US Embassy in your country and receive a visa and return legally in order to get a green card. Well, the reason there were like an estimated 2 million people or whatever that were, married to US citizens who couldn't get green cards was it's not that they can't, it's that they don't want to. Because the law says that if you're here for a certain amount of time, then you can be banned from the United States for 3 years. If you're here for more than a year, you can be banned for 10 years. And if you have been deported and re-entered, you can be permanently banned from the United States. Well, these are all people that are afraid that they will be banned from the United States from anywhere from 3 years to permanently. So they would rather live here illegally than, do the right thing and return
Right.
home. There's like a waiver for almost everything involving immigration. These people are so concerned that they wouldn't even ask for a waiver to go home and do the right thing in order to come back and get a green card. They would rather live here illegally. So why should we have any, sort of sympathy for those people?
Right. Right. Yeah. And then I think about, I don't know if you see deportation numbers. Do you come across those, and what would you say the rate of that is at this point, and maybe now compared to what it's been?
So I do see them on occasion, and it has pretty much cratered since this administration took office. So, people on the left like to talk about how Barack Obama was the deporter in chief. But in actuality, if you actually look at his metrics, he didn't really deport that many people. And Trump didn't deport that many fewer people, because they're like, oh, well, Obama deported more people than Trump. Well, that is factually correct. But Obama was also president for 8 years, and Trump
Right.
was only president for 4 years. And Trump, like, despite the fact that, there was a global pandemic during the final year of Trump's presidency, still somehow managed to deport like 80% of the same number of aliens as Obama did in his second term. So,
Wow.
like, you can't quite compare apples and oranges, but
Right.
also at the same time, Obama was actually fudging his numbers, counting as deportations things that actually aren't, like they were another administrative action. So
Okay.
he wanted to seem tough on immigration to get reelected, and then as soon as he was, what is it that Kamala Harris used to say? Like, as soon as he was no longer like unbridled by what had been, like, it just, he didn't care anymore. That's,
Right.
it's how we get DACA, how we get decreased enforcement. There was actually another program that he was trying to create that got struck down, and this would have been the equivalent of DACA for parents. So, like,
Wow.
they said it was parents of, US born children, but let's face it, it would have also been parents of DACA recipients. So,
Right.
but that quickly got struck down. But so that's the whole thing, is that once he was, he was on tape talking about like flexibility with Russia's then president, and like whispered on a hot mic, "Oh, once I get reelected, I'll have more flexibility." Well, that's the kind of flexibility he's talking about. So, Trump actually did a reasonably decent job deporting people. It wasn't spectacular. It could have been a lot better. Hopefully it will be better after January. But Obama's wasn't that much better, and Bush's wasn't necessarily that much better either. So it was mediocre. It was run of the mill, but Trump should get credit for how well he did despite losing almost an entire year to COVID, where you couldn't deport people.
Right. Yeah. Because the borders were, yeah, that's interesting. Because I remember Title 42, just all talking about that and what they were going to do, when that was lifted. Do you believe that in the next few months or before, Trump gets into office, that they will try to give amnesty to most of these individuals that have come across illegally?
I don't know that there's appetite for amnesty, and I don't think that there's necessarily enough votes, because the end of every administration, it seems like Congress attempts to pass some kind of amnesty. But like, if I were a newly elected politician, I probably wouldn't be as concerned, but somebody is going to be up for election in the midterms.
Hmm.
So, House members, and there's like a third of the Senate is going to be up for reelection. So, people enough people voted for Trump, having campaigned on mass deportations, that the idea of amnestying large numbers of people is probably not in the cards. But that being said, I do think that the Biden administration will attempt to like administratively
Yes,
keep
that's what
it
I
so
mean.
that Trump can't. Yeah. So like temporary protected status is probably like the prime candidate. So, the secretary, for pretty much any reason, real or imagined, that he or she can articulate, can be used to give temporary protected status to aliens, but it's a country specific thing. So I think since Tuesday night, like, people have been like trying to identify countries that they can TPS, and then an initial designation of TPS is good for 2 years, and a redesignation of the like 16 countries that now have it instead of like 5 under the Trump administration are going to all be like approved for extension, which will be another 18 months that Trump can't deport them. So I hope that there will be leverage on this Congress as it closes out, and the new Congress, to prohibit this administration from using TPS as a means of protecting people the law says can be deported from being so.
I mean, would he be able to override that? Like, that's something I'm not positive about.
He
If
is
they did
he is
that.
not. He is not.
Mhm.
So we would
Yeah,
be stuck with them for 18,
right.
18 months to 2 years.
Which is kind of scary to think about, because I feel like they're just always so hell bent on keeping their agenda going, that this would be a way to make it so that whatever his plans are first day in office wouldn't be able to happen. And then say at the midterms that could continue if the changes in Congress are made and they want to continue on with that to keep happening. I don't know. It's like
Yeah, the interesting thing about TPS is, if you think back to the amnesty efforts during the Trump administration, and also during this administration, starting with like the US Citizenship Act, is that they were pushing for amnesty for TPS recipients. But the part I find ironic as a careerist Fed in immigration is that by statute, they can't. So if you read the TPS statute, it actually says that even you can't even consider anything that changes the status of somebody with TPS without 60 votes. And so that's not 60 votes to approve, that's 60 votes to consider legislation to consider changing the status. So I don't know if those attempts to amnesty TPS beneficiaries was performative or bad staff work. But at the end of the day, like, that would have been something that could have easily been struck down if it didn't have the requisite number of votes for consideration. But I'm hoping we don't get to that. And I hope that there are enough Democrats with some sense that say to Mayorkas, we can't let you continue down this road. You are one of the reasons that we lost badly, and we will not let, American voters remember this come the midterms. So you need to just cool it, just knock it off. We lost, let's lick our wounds and regroup for 2026.
Man, yeah, so it's crazy, and we're getting up on time. I don't want to take too much of your time, but I would love to have you come back and just continue to share your insight and wisdom, being in this realm. And, I just so appreciative of you. But what would you like to leave with our audience as far as just anything that you'd like to say?
Well, first, I'll thank you for the time. I've really appreciated it. I would be honored to come back and talk. I'm really relieved that, when we set this up was before the election. So I'm actually happy that this was a positive episode, as opposed to, all of me talking about all the horrible things people could expect. But I would encourage your audience to continue pressing. Like, Trump can't do this alone. Like, mass deportation, functionally speaking, is easy, but it's going to require labor and it's going to require money. And so without those two things, it's going to be somewhat stunted. So I would encourage people to, if you voted for mass deportations, whether that was the number one consideration or number 5, like, still, if that's what you want, and that is what we need, is that you need to be pressing. Like, don't just wait until the midterms and then, like, hope for the best. Like, you need to, who's going to be likely your congressman or congresswoman or senator come the 119th Congress. Now is the time to start reaching out to them to say, this is what I want. I want, more ICE beds. I want more planes funded, more personnel. And, if you don't do it, I'm going to start looking for someone to primary you in 6 months.
I love that. And it's interesting because it's like, before I'm like, defund this stuff. Now I'm like, okay, we need to fund this part of it. You know what I mean? Like, I don't want you to fund more coming in. We need to fund them going out. And I think that a lot of people would be happy to do that, as opposed to what is being funded now, which is insane. And it's $1 trillion business. So I just thank you so much, Hart. It's been such a blessing to have you. And again, I'll have to have you come back. We could sit here for hours, you know what I mean? Like, going, but I'm sure that you have things to do. So, God bless you, and, just keep on doing what you're doing. I really appreciate when people are willing to come forward and talk about the things that are happening around us.
Yeah, I'm always, my personal ethos is that I'm a Fed. You pay my salary. So, I can't show you how everything works, but if I can provide you with a sense that, things happen for a reason and understanding them, then I feel like I'm actually providing value, because otherwise I'm just a nameless, faceless cog who is, sucking at the public trough for, money. And I don't want that. I want people to feel like I am actually a value add, that, if I'm the only person in government that cares about enforcement of immigration law, then so be it. But I'm not, not even close.
Which is good. And that's why we need just more and more. And I think it is important to, hold this administration accountable that's coming in, because we always should do that. That should be something that we just always engage in locally and on a national level, but mostly locally. But it's going to take we the people to continue to like get this going. So I love that you said that, because I think that that's important, that we need to stay on top of this, not just kind of let it be something where we're like, oh, he's got it, nothing, we don't need to worry. We still need to do our part and hold these officials accountable and make sure that they're doing what they said they would.
Yeah, absolutely. And so, I talked about some things, and I'll drop them underneath your post about this
Okay.
session. And so if people have questions, hopefully they'll follow me and interact and learn more about what's happening, so that they feel comfortable in saying yes, what the Trump administration is doing is good, or no, it's not good. And this is what I think should happen. So I'm all about information. I want the American people to be informed.
Absolutely. Because if we're not, then it's like we don't know where to go. And we should be educating ourselves and learning from others who do that. So make sure you follow him on X at 8USC12. And, he's got a bit of information. So have a beautiful rest of your day. And I look forward to having you back.
Sounds fantastic. Be well. God bless.
God bless. Okay. Thank you guys for joining us. I hope you enjoyed that. Join me next time where I bring you more truth, love, light, and all of the good things. God